From Music City, USA, it's David Hooper and Music Business Radio.
From Nashville, Tennessee, this is Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper, your host, and we are at South Street Studios today. Took the show on the road on Music Row here in Music City, USA. With me today, Eric Dahl. He is a guitar nerd. That's what he told me.
It's true.
Rock in review, and this man brought in so much equipment. He's got an interesting story. I'm going to get into that. But we originally brought him in as you said, Eric, you're a guitar nerd, and you brought in so much equipment with you. But as we started talking, setting up all this equipment, you had an interesting story. I said, man, we've got to do more than reviews today. We've got to talk about your story. And you've got a famous, I guess we'll call him a friend now, B.B. King.
Right.
So let's get into how you know B.B. King and what the story is, because it kind of really you've got a brand new book too.
Right. You know, working with Blue Book Publishing to bring out the book has been pretty exciting. And really the whole concept for the book, David, came out from going to a pawn shop. So, working and living in Las Vegas, the music stores there aren't to the level that we have here in Nashville. So I would have to go to the pawn shops to find the better instruments, the better deals, all that kind of stuff. I also did values. So I would I would help out the pawn shops by, they would look something up on eBay, and I'm like, okay, well, actually the guitar is worth this.
Yeah, and let me interject there, because something in Nashville that I found really, I'm a native Nashvilleian, so I've been here for a long time, and it's interesting to go, any pawn shop you go into, they know guitars. You're not going to necessarily get that deal that you might get in other parts of the country. And it sounds like maybe that's what was happening in Las Vegas. They don't know guitars that well.
They don't. They know their jewelry, they know their watches, they know all this other stuff, but they didn't have the background in instruments and amplifiers and pedals and everything that so many people do in this market in Nashville. So I was sort of like their guy. So they would have me on speed dial to where if somebody came in with a cool Gibson, Fender, Gretsch, Martin, whatever, and they're like, okay, here's what I got. How much is it worth? So
you're like, if anybody's ever seen the show Pawn Stars,
right?
You're like that guy. So, I got to bring in an expert who specializes in guitars,
right?
And that's you.
Right. I've still got buddies there at a number of the pawn shops in Las Vegas, and since I still work with the two TV stations there in Las Vegas as well, I get into that market, 3-4 times a year to see a lot of our friends out there still too. So it's fun having that time. But what happened was my regular pawn shop that I would go to on lunch for relaxation in Las Vegas and check out what instruments came in or fell out of pawn, they call me up, at work and say, hey, we've got a Lucille. Would you be interested? You want to come down and take a look? And
I'm now explain Lucille for people that don't know what that means, the non-guitarist.
Right. The Gibson Lucille model is the iconic guitar that B.B. King is associated with, and it goes back to the original story, David, to where he was playing a house party at the time, and a fight broke out, and basically this can of diesel got knocked over. The whole place went up on fire. Everybody runs out. B.B. King runs back into the house, the burning building, to get his guitar, and he finds out, because it was the only guitar he had, so he finds out the next day that the fight was over a woman named Lucille. And so he has named every other guitar since then Lucille, to remind him not to go into a burning building for a guitar. And so Gibson, in their wisdom, and obviously, covered it in the book too, they actually launched the Lucille model, which is very similar to like a 335 or 355 Gibson, except it doesn't have sound holes on the front. Okay, so the whole top is solid, and it has everything like B.B. King wants it.
So it's got different pickups, the frets and the adjustments are just like B.B. King would be playing.
Exactly like the model he plays, and B.B. will tell you in person that he loves the Lucille's that Gibson makes for him. And they've made a number of custom models over the years. And so what happened was, I went down to the pawn shop to check out this guitar and really not knowing what, and I was also broke because I hadn't been gigging a lot right then. So I go in and look at this guitar. My buddy Chaz opens up the case, and this guitar is beautiful. It's got specially carved pickup covers, and it's got a specially carved pick guard and a headstock that says 80th on it, but it's covered in sweat and grime. So I'm like, okay, somebody was playing down on Fremont Street and had to hawk it to get out of town or something. And then I lift up the guitar, David, and look on the back of the headstock, and it says Prototype 1.
Whoa, yeah, because that's always a good sign.
Yeah, and as a collector and buyer and trader and all that, you think, well, it's good or bad. Either number one, I thought that possibly BB had played it for 5 minutes and then handed it back to the Gibson custom shop and said,
didn't like
okay,
it.
make them. Well, use it as, a trial and say, okay, go ahead and make this. Or I thought it could be a fake.
Right. Okay.
Because you don't know. Because
that happens from time to time in a pawn shop, I would imagine.
You know, I've actually found, last year when I was in one of my pawn shops, I wandered in there and I saw what I thought was a Gibson Les Paul Custom. And from about 25 feet, it looked like one. And I got up to it and I'm like, wow, that's not. You know, and they thought it was. And so, you know, I said, well, give me a screwdriver. And I went back and dismantled this Les Paul, wannabe Les Paul, and it was a China knockoff. Yeah. But it had Gibson on the headstock and everything else, but, you know, the China copies that float around. So they found out the guitar they thought was worth $1,800, $2,000 was worth about $300. Right. So, and that's the reason, you know, you do a lot of the values and stuff. So when I bought that one, I went ahead and bought it from Chaz, and he wouldn't come down on the price. So I had to pay him the full amount, which I don't typically do at a pawn shop. So then I took it back home, not knowing that it, you know, whose guitar it was. I polish off all the sweat. I cut the guitar strings. I oil the fretboard. I do what I do to every guitar, you know, and set up the action, all this stuff. And then for 2.5 months, I researched it.
So you're looking up the serial number to kind of see where it came from? Or did it have a serial number?
Yeah, it was tough because you couldn't hardly see the serial number because prototype 1 was stamped over it. So truthfully, it was more of researching the style, the model of Lucille that it was. And so I just kept digging. I got a hold of Walter Carter. I got a hold of George Gruen, all the people that I like to bounce things off of.
Like the real guitar nerds.
Yeah, to the next level.
Yeah, to people who don't know those names, and those are the guys that, like Gruen, he's got a store in Nashville on Broadway, and I don't think there's a guitar in that store that's probably under about $10,000 or $15,000.
Well, you know, and George just moved his store also, so he just moved his store for a whole new location. But yeah, I mean, he'll sell, you know, Martin, pre-World War II Martin to Brad Paisley for $125,000. George and Walter both, I mean, they deal in high-end collectible guitars, and they have like people, you know, like Brad Paisley, who will say, I need this model of guitar for my tour or studio. So I reached out to those people looking for information because I had exhausted, you know, I've got a huge amount of research books, and I had exhausted all that. And then I started contacting Gibson once a week, every week for 2.5 months. And so I would call them or email the Gibson shop going, what have you found out? Who can you talk to? Who can you turn me on to? Let me meet somebody. Let me talk to somebody to explain about this 80th birthday model that I had. After 2.5 months of doing that, finally Pat Foley, who is artist relations with Gibson, calls me up on the phone at work. He says, well, you know, you've got a Gibson Lucille. I'm like, thank you, Pat. I've got 1 or 2 more of those in my guitar room right now. You're really not helping me. I need some information on this model. And he goes, well, Eric, that's B.B. King's, you know, and he really wants it back. So it ends up the one that I bought from the pawn shop was his 80th birthday present that Gibson had given to him in Los Angeles in 2006. So apparently one of his people working for him actually stole the guitar from BB out of his home, took it to a pawn shop and hawked it, and then I ended up being the guy that bought it.
You're listening to Music Business Radio. We are on the road today at South Street Studios on Music Row, Nashville, Tennessee, talking about what happens, the stories behind the guitars that you pick up in pawn shops. And this is such a common thing for musicians. You see these ads on Craigslist, please find my guitar. It was stolen out of the back. So it happens even to the best of them, even to B.B. King, and sounds like it was somebody that he knew, unfortunately.
It really was. It was someone that worked for him, and he sold it to the pawn shop, and so that's how it fell into my hands. And so when Gibson contacted me, when Pat Foley reached out to me, he's like, you know, well, first off, is it still in the country? Because a lot of these guitars get sold to Japan and go into personal collections and never come out again. Yeah. And I didn't know that at the time because I'm like, well, yeah, because I live in Las Vegas. It's in my guitar room hanging on a wall right now. So that was sort of funny to me. And then he's like, well, how much is it going to take to get this back to BB? I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, how much are you looking for on this guitar? And I'm like, I'm not looking for anything. I said, if it's B.B. King's guitar, I'm going to return it. I said, I'd kind of like to have a Lucille since that's what I bought from the pawn shop, but I don't want any money. And so then Pat's like, okay, well, I got to go. So Pat hangs up on me. So then like 5 minutes later, one of B.B. King's people called me up and they're like, so we understand you might have Mr. King's, prize Lucille. And I'm like, that's what I was just told a few minutes ago. And they're like, well, how much is it going to take to get this back from you? I said, it's not going to take anything. I said, I'm not going to take money.
So how much had you invested in this guitar?
I think the approximate amount, and I've still got the receipt somewhere, I need to frame it, was $2,163.
About $2,200.
Yeah.
You're not even going to take that to return it?
No. I told him, I said, if I could get a Lucille to replace it, that'd be great. But if not, I'm still going to return B.B. King's guitar. So then they talked to B.B., and B.B.'s like, well, I want to meet this guy. And so we went through this whole thing for a good month or so before he came off tour because he lives there in Las Vegas. finally, when we worked it out on tour, and Mr. King worked it out to where Gibson delivered a Lucille to his office, and we met up, and I got to hang out with him for 45 minutes and talk to him about just everything. He offered me a Diet Coke, and it was just, the whole thing was surreal. It was just one of those crazy moments in time. And I'm sitting right next to Mr. King, and we've got the case to his 80th birthday Lucille in between us. And he says, well, Eric, would you mind opening the case? I'm like, well, sure, I'd be happy to. He looks down and he says, well, would you mind lifting it out for me? Because he's got diabetes. And so I lifted it out, and he was just smiling from ear to ear. So if you see the pictures, he was so thrilled because he thought he'd never see this guitar again.
Right.
And like you and I were talking before we even started rolling, Gibson had tried to recreate this guitar even and couldn't. So basically, since this was prototype 1, they had lined up guitars, and he got to pick the one that played and sounded the best. Mm-hmm. And this was his pride and joy. And apparently, he's had a number of guitars stolen over the years. The original Lucille was stolen out of a trunk. So in all of his span of playing, since he was a teenager, he's never had one returned.
Wow.
He just loved this guitar. And so the funny thing about it was I handed over to him, and, and he's just smiling, and everybody, his personal assistant Myron and Laverne, his roadshow manager there in Las Vegas, were all there in the room. And my buddy Ted was taking pictures, which, Mr. King was nice enough to allow us to do. And he was just grinning from ear to ear. And then I pulled out the other stuff in the case because, guitar players, we keep junk in the cases. It had an extra bridge, 2 bridges and all these parts. And I'm like, are these yours also? And this guitar strap, he's like, yeah, it's all mine. He said, that's exactly as it was when I left it in my house, because I guess he'd come off tour and just put the guitar down.
Yeah.
And then it was stolen that way.
Yeah. Well, that was the beginning of what you're doing now. You're an author. Did you ever think that would happen?
Not really. And I think most of my teachers from college and high school never thought either did. So knowing that I've exceeded their expectations now.
Absolutely. You've got a book, and it's a fascinating book. It's called Lucille and the Loves Before Her. It's all about the history of B.B. King and his guitars.
Right.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to dive deeper into the book and explain kind of the story behind it. David Hooper here on Music Business Radio. I'm with Eric Dahl. We're on the road today at South Street Studios on Music Row in Nashville, Tennessee. More from Eric when we come back on Music Business Radio.
I'm Bart Herbison, Executive Director of the Nashville Songwriters Association International, and you're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the biz.
On the web at musicbusinessradio.com.
Lightning 100's Live on the Green Music Festival. Free live music in front of Nashville's Metro Courthouse, featuring national artists sharing the stage with some of Music City's very best. Thursday is opening night. Join us for performances by City and Color, Nashville's own The Weeks, and Spanish Gold. VIP tickets are on sale now. Visit liveonthegreen.net to get yours while they last. Stay tuned to Lightning 100 for a chance to win seriously good VIP tickets, compliments of Erie Insurance. Lightning 100's Live on the Green, powered by Regions Bank, Blue Chair Bay Rum, Piedmont Natural Gas, Thornton's, Miller Coors, and Carl Black Chevrolet. Proudly produced by Nashville's independent radio, Lightning 100.
Said I think I'll go to Boston.
Hey, this is Chris from Augustana, music business graduate. You're listening to Music Business Radio.
From Nashville, Tennessee, it's Music Business Radio. I'm your host, David Hooper, and with me today, Eric Dahl. He's the author of Lucille and the Loves Before Her. It's a new book about B.B. King and his history with his guitars, amplifiers, as a musician. Eric's got an interesting story we were talking about before the break, and I think it's interesting probably for people to listen to, and kind of maybe strange that you would give a guitar to B.B. King and he would be so excited. But just kind of a funny story, Eric, as we walked in the studio today, and we're at South Street Studios, Bobby Holland is our engineer, and we just happened to be here, and Bobby had a custom guitar delivered. And you guys, it's like two super nerds getting together about guitars. And, of course, I play guitar. Producer Gary Crane is here in the studio. He's a guitar player. And guitarists love their guitar.
Oh,
so I think any guitarist can understand how important that guitar was to B.B. King. I mean, it's his livelihood. It lets him express himself. It's almost an extension of himself.
It really is. And particularly the model that I was fortunate enough to be able to return to him was an 80th birthday model, which they only made 82 of those anyway, David. And he had Prototype 1, and this was a guitar that he had toured with, at the time that I came into possession of it, for basically 3 years. The only guitar he toured with.